What's going on, everyone? My name's Tenebris Infinite, and today I'd like to talk on Generation Zero's sequel and why we should have expanded weapon customization, allowing for us to use things like different handguards, foregrips, laser sights, more barrel attachments, pistol grips, and stocks, expanding on how we interact with our guns and personalize them. But again, we'll be looking at this from the lens of a sequel set in modern-day Sweden, as opposed to the 1980s and 90s reimagination that we see in current-day Generation Zero. Mostly because I think it'd be impossible to do with our current Gen Zero weapons. They're kind of putting the game to be modular in their own way, but we'll talk about that later on in this video. This is kind of like a pitch to the team, so if you do enjoy this idea, please hit that thumbs up button. So first up, let's talk about Generation Zero's weapons, and sadly this idea wouldn't work for what we have currently, as Generation Zero already has its attachments in the barrel, scope, magazine, and newly introduced weapon skins, which I think is a great start. But if we had the ability to really personalize our weapons, get in depth with a few more options, the ability to add further attachments to turn our weapons from the sort of typical guns they are into something really our own here in the game, it'd be a massive step forward for GZ. Sure, the introduction of skins does show potential, but I think a request like this is possibly too big for Generation Zero's current scope. Asking to rewrite all the weapons in the game is a pretty big thing to ask for, but if we saw this sort of weapon customization in a sequel, with bigger and badder machines to take care of, it would all come together as a beautiful expansion to some of the more lacking core systems of Generation Zero. So today I'd like to take two different examples of weapon customization and blend them together to match Generation Zero. Firstly from Tarkov, then from another game called Ground Branch, as both have weapon customization with their own unique details. I don't think Generation Zero needs to be as complex as Tarkov or as immersive as Ground Branch, but having expanded options to customize the weapons and gear we fight machines with, even in a simpler sense, would be a benefit overall. Tarkov does weapon customization in a really interesting way. Essentially, you have a bunch of weapons that act as bases, and from there you have a set number of items based on what type of base is used. This system takes account for multiple base types as well, so an M16 is customized with different attachments than an AK, but an AK-47 will have similar types of attachments as the AK-101. It's a pretty complex system of interwebbing attachments, and a lot of them, even going as in-depth as changing the receiver and barrel lengths of weapons. Now, I'm not saying Generation Zero's sequel needs to go this in-depth, but instead trimming away the more complicated attachments like barrel lengths, and focusing instead on the idea of weapons making subsets of attachments. To cover a greater broad of weapons all in one is a great approach to making an in-depth weapon customization system. And then for Ground Branch, I'd like to talk about the simplicity of the click and drag function of applying attachments. It's a super smooth system, and that in combination with the broad strokes of multiple attachments for each subset of weapons would wind up with a really cool pseudo-immersive way of applying attachments. The only thing I'd drop is the whole rail positioning, as that brings things to a really in-depth level I don't think that GZ quite needs. But the whole method of actually taking the attachment, seeing what it looks like, and then applying it to a weapon would be really neat, I think, for how we could apply these attachments, either from a workbench or a in-game menu screen. And again, let's circle on back to what could be made as these one-size-fits-many type of attachments. Handguards are one of the more essential attachments, I think. As the thing you see the most, anything happening on the front end of the weapon makes a huge difference on the aesthetic of the weapon that you're using. These also open the doors to lasers and foregrips, and more that we'll cover up in just a second here. So these are essential not just for looks, but the functionality of this whole idea. foregrips that could add stability to the weapon and reduce a small amount of recoil. Laser sights, and flashlights as well. Removing the flashlight and making it an attachment alongside lasers would be really immersive and more fitting for the modern day combat idea. More muzzle attachments like compensators, flash reducers, and even blast mitigation devices on high caliber weapons. And lastly, stocks. Even though we can't really see them, so they aren't as important as the rest, I think, but might feel amiss if left out. I don't know. You dudes let me know. What do you think of stocks as attachments for a potential GZ sequel? So, to summarize here, GZ's sequel would be hugely benefited by upgrading our attachment system to allow for greater weapon customization, using weapons in a similar way as Tarkov does, with each weapon serving as a type of base for the attachments that could then be made for general purpose on a large number of weapons, and having us interact with it by a simple click and drag functionality for a select number of attachments that would be kind of the most essential. It would be such a massive improvement to a sequel for our machine-slaying Swedish simulator. So let me know what you think of this idea in the comments down below, and thank you for any and all feedback you dudes give on this one. But for now, I'll catch you all in the next one. Until then, peace.